Welcome to Known and Trusted. I hope you had a wonderful summer. My name is Anna Sonoda. Today, we're going to talk about the elephant. There's an old story about several blind men encountering an elephant for the very first time. One touches the elephant's leg and says, "An elephant is like a tree." Another touches the trunk and says, "No, an elephant is like a rope." Someone else touches the elephant's side and says, "No, an elephant is like a wall." Another touches an ear, another finds a tail, and each person is convinced that they understand the entire animal as it is. The interesting part of the story isn't that they're wrong. They're not wrong. They simply don't have all the pieces. And I think about that, especially when it comes to grooming. When cases happen, people are looking at a piece or a part of the elephant. They rarely get the opportunity to see the entire animal because the problem typically isn't something that people didn't see. It's something that they didn't understand how to interpret. Sometimes the problem is that everybody saw something and nobody had the whole picture. Today, I want to talk about one of the most important skills in grooming prevention: learning to recognize, because we're all vulnerable to this. Not only parents, not only churches, not just schools, all of us. As we've talked about before, predators are everywhere, but they're not everyone, and they stand out in the way that they behave. Our brains can do something incredibly efficient. They can fill in other parts. They can interpret what's not there. We don't experience the world as an exact record of the facts. We experience it through pieces, through chunks. A teacher sees a child who loves the coach. A parent sees a coach who's always volunteering their time, always caring. Another parent sees the person who brings extra snacks, who stays late, who shows up early. A leader sees someone who has been faithful for years. A child sees someone who finally understands them, who sees them, who cares about them. A coworker sees someone who is generous and dependable. All of those things can be true. And still, something else can be happening. Something else can be weird. And that's often where prevention can get strange, because the question isn't simply, did anyone see a warning sign? The question is more, what did each of you see exactly? And what did you assume based on what you saw? One of the simplest prevention tools I can teach you is to separate what you observed from what you concluded. For example, I saw him give her a ride home. That's an observation. He's just being helpful. That's an interpretation. She really trusts him. Observation? No, that's an interpretation. They have a special relationship. Interpretation. When we mistake our interpretation for a fact, we stop looking at the entire situation or the entire event, and that is problematic. Once we've decided what something means, we tend to organize around that conclusion. A new piece of information, if it doesn't fit our conclusion, is tossed out. Now, you've heard me talk a lot about trust. Trust is the foundation of our good, healthy relationships. We need it. We want it. Children need trusted adults. Families need trusted communities filled with trusted adults. Communities need trust. But trust could sometimes alter our perception and alter how we interpret behavior. When I trust someone, I am much more likely to offer them the benefit of the doubt. I am much more likely to have a positive interpretation about their behavior. Their exception looks compassionate. Their private conversation looks like mentoring. Their availability looks admirable. Their closeness to a child looks meaningful and important. Here's the prevention question I want you to keep in mind. What happens when trust becomes the explanation for everything? That's when trust can stop being a relationship and start becoming a blind spot. Think back to the elephant parable. The person holding the leg isn't stupid. Neither is the person touching the ear nor the person touching the trunk. They're accurately describing their experience. Their mistake is believing that their experience is the whole. And that's exactly what can happen in communities. One person sees generosity, another sees secrecy, another sees favoritism, another notices a child always alone with the same adult, and we ignore concern. Everyone has a perfectly reasonable explanation for their piece until somebody finally asks, wait, what were we all seeing together? When we put it all together, what do we actually see? And that is prevention. That is the core of today's episode. I've talked for years about the importance of patterns, of recognizing that grooming unfolds tiny piece by tiny piece. A single interaction can be completely normal, or it can be something that is noteworthy. Maybe a ride home, a gift, a compliment, a private conversation, a hug, added attention. None of those by themselves tell you what's necessarily happening. It's the pattern, it's the movement of the dynamic between those two individuals. I would ask you to think about and pay attention to the movement or the direction. Is this relationship becoming more private? Is this individual seeking more influence? Is access increasing or changing? Is the relationship becoming more exclusive? Are exceptions to the rule accumulating or expanding? Is secrecy increasing? Is accountability decreasing? And is supervision decreasing? Is this adult becoming emotionally central to the life of this child? Those are pattern questions. Those aren't necessarily incident questions. And pattern questions are much more useful when we're trying to decide whether one particular moment counts towards the whole. This is one reason I use the 4F formula model. Flattery, favoritism, forbidden fruits, and fear. Flattery can make someone feel uniquely seen. Favoritism can make them feel uniquely chosen. Forbidden fruits can create private rules and shared secrecy, which contributes to shame and guilt on the part of survivors. Fear can make the relationship costly to lose. One of those things can happen in an entirely healthy relationship. However, what is the direction they're moving in? That is part of the elephant that we miss when we look at each piece independently. Now, the GAS model, grooming, access, and space, asks us to look at those three components. Grooming is asking who's becoming influential. Access is asking who's gaining proximity and opportunity. And space is asking where is this relationship becoming private, unobserved, unquestioned. Again, none of these questions requires you to diagnose a person or label them evil or bad or terrible. Instead, we're evaluating the conditions. What are the conditions of this relationship? And that's extremely, extremely important because prevention will never be led by the other individual's intentions. It has to be led by observed behaviors, documented behaviors. We can work only with what we can observe. This is where I want to remind you about the smoke detector analogy. We often tell people, parents alike, trust your gut. And I understand why. Your instincts matter and they work. But your gut is a little bit like a smoke detector. And grooming bypasses a smoke detector. Grooming acts more like carbon monoxide. It doesn't announce itself as dangerous. It's invisible. It's gradual. It's difficult to recognize. And most importantly, something you can actually adapt to. That's what makes recognizing carbon dioxide so dangerous. And in grooming, the relationship often feels good. Not because the child is choosing it, but because grooming feels good. It feels good to be flattered. It feels good to be chosen, selected. The person can often be helpful. The child can be perceived as feeling special. And even parents can be grateful. Communities can often feel cherished and lucky to have this person. All of these things can exist while a pattern underneath it is changing. So don't ask your gut to be the only instrument. Build your carbon monoxide detector. Get educated. Add observation. Add pattern recognition. Add structure. Add accountability. One of the biggest mistakes adults make is in asking why the child didn't tell anybody. But I think about all the pieces a child may be holding. Attachment. They may love this person. They may feel loved by this person. Ambiguity. I don't know whether what happened was wrong or if that's how relationships are. And aftermath. I know what telling could change. I know what could result from speaking up. Now add the adult community around them. The adult is likely trusted. The adult is liked. The adult may be important to the family or to the environment. And the adult may have even helped the child academically or in a talent or different skill. So the child isn't simply deciding whether to report an incident or not. They're trying to understand the entire ecosystem. And that's very, very difficult for a child to do. Sometimes we assume silence means nothing happened. But silence can have its own story. And sometimes that story is, I don't know what to call this. I don't have words for this. I don't want to lose this person. No one will believe me. I don't want to hurt my family. I'm afraid of what may happen next. Silence is not a reliable measure of whether or not something has happened. In this country alone, the average age of first disclosure is 52. 52. So we cannot rely on self-report to create safe environments for our kiddos. Adults must carry more of the weight and more of the responsibility in creating the conditions in which predation does not thrive. Grooming does not happen in a vacuum. There's an ecosystem around every relationship. Parents, teachers, coaches, youth leaders, friends, neighbors, administrators, faith communities, other children. Sometimes the individual is the only person intentionally manipulating the relationship, but everyone else still experiences a piece of that relationship. And that means prevention depends on something very, very simplistic. We have to be willing to compare what we see. We have to be willing to hold space for the fact that what part of the elephant we are touching is not the entire picture. A willingness to see the whole. Try this next time an event or an observation gives you pause. Instead of asking, is this person dangerous? Try asking, what did I observe? And then ask yourself, what am I interpreting as a result of this behavior? What else might I need to know? And then think, what condition could I change without knowing someone's intention? Maybe you don't know why someone wants private access. You don't have to know that. And you don't have to solve for that. You can still say, let's keep the interaction observable. You don't have to know why someone wants to communicate privately. You can say, let's use the group platform. You don't have to determine someone's character or someone's intent. You can apply the same standards to everyone. This is prevention. I don't want parents walking around frightened of every single adult who helps their kids. I don't want churches becoming a place where kindness is treated as evidence of danger. I do want people to trust with their eyes open. I do want an expectation that healthy trust coexists with accountability, with interruptibility, with questionability, with observability. Healthy relationships can tolerate hard questions. Healthy adults don't need secrecy in order to maintain a connection. Healthy systems don't require one person to be above scrutiny or standards. And healthy communities don't punish people for noticing. Simply noticing could be the difference between interrupting predation and not. Take a relationship or an environment where children spend time. Think about the setting. Think about what can be seen in these interactions. What can be interrupted? What can be questioned? What can be verified? Those are some questions I want us to start practicing. I want us to be able to recognize the entire elephant although we only stand at one side of a larger animal. One more lesson I want you to take away from the elephant parable is that people have spent a lot of time arguing amongst themselves. No, it's not a wall. You're wrong. No, you're wrong. They could have spent much more productive time comparing information. And that is what healthy communities do. We need you to speak up about what you notice, not to notice the exact same thing, but to share what you do notice. We need people to feel safe enough to say, I noticed something. And we need a community that responds with, tell me what you saw, encouraging transparency, not responding with, that can't be right. You must have seen that incorrectly, or using established trust to excuse away behavior. She's a great person. He's a great person. So as you leave this episode today, think about this. I don't want you to be fixated on who can I trust. I want you to be thinking about what am I seeing and what might I be missing? The question that turns the elephant from a metaphor into your next prevention skill. Sometimes the person touching the elephant is right. Maybe sometimes the person touching the trunk is right. The person touching the leg is right. The person touching the ear is right. They're all right. They just aren't seeing the whole thing. And neither are we. That's why prevention requires more than instinct, more than your gut. It requires our curiosity, our transparency, our willingness, our efforts to be open and to communicate aloud. And it requires us to recognize patterns. It requires conversation, and it requires systems and policymakers to make questions welcome and to have channels for questioning. As we close today, I want you to remember that grooming rarely walks into a room announcing itself. It starts off sweet. It becomes familiar. It earns our trust. It becomes explainable. It becomes normal. And by the time the whole picture is actually visible, people often ask, how did we miss this? And sometimes the answer is we didn't miss everything. We saw a piece. We just didn't put our pieces together. So notice, ask, compare, stay curious. And remember, you don't have to see the whole elephant in order to be the kind of person who helps everyone else see it. I'm Anna Sonoda, and this has been an episode of Known and Trusted. If you're coming to CrimeCon UK, come and see my speech about the architecture of betrayal and how grooming is built and why that matters for every community. Tune in for the next episode of Known and Trusted. And if you haven't already, explore my Substack, where I talk about current cases, write articles, and present my lens on different topics. Thank you so much for your willingness to support this mission to get this information in the hands of people on the front lines. If you're curious, you can check out Groom, Understanding How a Child Becomes a Target, and Wait, That's Weird with your kids in order to start the dialogue today about noticing and staying curious. Thanks for tuning in.